The wind cut across the high cliffs of the western mountains, the kind of cold wind that carried warnings long before trouble arrived. Travelers usually kept far from those ridges. But trouble had come before she even understood what kind of danger she had stepped into. Dawnlight, pale and golden, rolled over the rough stone slopes and touched the trembling face of the young woman tied against an old pine. Her name was Liren, a quiet soul with a brave heart, and her voice cracked as she begged the men who had dragged her there. They showed no pity. They never had Liren's wrists burned against the coarse rope as she pulled, tears running down cheeks streaked with dust. Far below, the valley spread wide like a great painted world. She knew no one down there would hear her cries. The mountains swallowed sound the way they swallowed secrets. And these men had planned it that way. They stood a few paces back, arguing among themselves. Their rifles leaned against rocks, their coats flapping in the sharp wind. Each of them avoided looking directly at her, as if guilt would catch them if they dared. They told themselves they were doing the right thing, that she had seen too much, that they had no choice. But choices had been made long before. Liren's heartbeat thudded loud in her ears. She tried to steady her breath, trying to show courage the way her mother once taught her. Telling her courage was something a person decided to carry, even when their hands shook. But nothing could stop the fear rising inside her now. Her voice cut through the still morning air. She begged them to let her go, to give her a chance to walk away and never speak of what she had seen. Her words echoed between the stones. But the men kept arguing as if her pleas were nothing more than the wind. One of them, a tall man named Redek, walked closer. His eyes were harsh, but his jaw twitched like he was fighting something inside. He had never wanted to be part of this, but fear and greed were tangled together in him. He warned the others that leaving her tied there was worse than anything else they could do. Wolves roamed these mountains. Storms came without warning. The cold alone could take a life by nightfall. The others didn't care. They said she knew things she wasn't meant to know. And the safest way to keep a secret in the old American frontier was to silence whoever carried it. A faraway hawk screamed as it cut across the sky, its call sharp enough to make all of them look up. For a moment, everything went still. The pine needles shivered. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Liren's chest tightened as she looked toward the higher ridge. She didn't know why, but something about the silence felt different, like the world had shifted. Redok muttered under his breath and told the others they should finish this quickly. They didn't know that someone was watching them from the upper ledge, high among the broken rocks, hidden by towering pines and shadows cast by the rising sun. An Apache warrior had been tracking the men since before dawn. His name was Talkin, a man known by many tribes and many wanderers as a protector who walked the line between danger and mercy. His eyes were sharp as river glass, and he saw everything. The way the woman struggled, the way the men hissed their threats, the way fear shaped their choices. Talkin had seen cruelty before, but this was cowardice, and cowardice stirred a fire inside him that nothing could put out. He had spent the night following their tracks, drawn by the scent of smoke and the sound of trouble drifting through the canyons. At first he thought they were hunters. Then he noticed their steps were frantic. Then he saw the rope marks on the ground from dragging someone unwilling. That was when he knew someone was in danger. Now he stood on a cliff just above them, the morning light touching the carved lines of his jaw and the strong muscles along his chest and arms. A bow hung across his back, feathers tied near the grips. 2 arrows rested in his hand, silent and patient. He didn't need many. Talkin had a reputation. When he acted with intent. Down below, Liren's breathing grew shorter. She felt the rope cut deeper into her skin each time she tried to ease her body weight. Her sight blurred as she looked toward the valley again. She wondered if this was how her life would end, tied to a tree while men argued about what to do with her. But something inside her refused to break. She whispered a prayer she hadn't spoken since childhood. She told the mountains to carry her voice, hoping someone, anyone, would hear it. Maybe the spirits of these lands. Maybe someone wandering close. She didn't expect a real person to answer. One of the men shoved Redek aside and stepped toward her with a firm decision on his face. Enough talk, he growled as he reached for his rifle. We end this now. Liren's knees nearly buckled from fear as he raised the barrel toward her. Then a sound split the air. Not thunder. Not wind. A sharp snap. A warning. The men froze and looked around, their hands drifting to their weapons. Reddick cursed under his breath. The other two began scanning the ridge, their nerves rising like wildfire. Liren's heartbeat hammered as she searched the rocky slopes with wide eyes. A large shape moved between the trees, then it stepped into the light. Talcon emerged slowly. Every step controlled, every breath steady. The sun caught the bronze tone of his skin. His black hair, tied back with leather, fluttered in the wind. His chest was bare, except for the strap that held his weapons. He moved with the calm presence of someone who understood these mountains better than anyone alive. The men stumbled back at the sight of him. No one had expected an Apache warrior to appear from the high cliffs. Especially not at that moment. Especially not for her. Liren's breath hitched as she watched him descend the slope toward them. The mountains behind him, towering like old protectors. The men whispered to each other in panic. Talcon didn't look at them. His gaze went straight to Liren, her fear, her strength, her helplessness tied to that tree. He saw everything in one glance. Something in his eyes changed. A promise formed in that silence. A promise she didn't yet understand. Reddick tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "We don't want trouble," he called out. Talcon continued walking, his boots pressed softly into the dirt. His hand rested near the handle of his blade. His breathing never changed, as if he trusted the land to guide him. Liren felt warmth gather in her chest, a hope she didn't dare embrace. But when Talcon finally shifted his gaze to the men, they felt the weight of it. It was not the look of a man wandering by accident. It was the look of a warrior who had chosen to stand between danger and the innocent. He stopped just a few steps away from them. The wind quieted. The mountains waited. Liren held her breath as the men tightened, their grips on their rifles. They didn't know whether to run or fight, and fear twisted their decisions. Talcon finally spoke, his voice deep and steady. "Leave her," he said. No one moved. Not even the man aiming the rifle. Talcon took one more step, slow and deliberate. The men's hands trembled, Liren's heart pounded, and the story left hanging in that breath. As the mountains prepared to witness whatever came next, the air between them grew tight as Talcon faced the men. Nothing moved except the wind brushing against the tall pines. Liren could hear her own heartbeat louder than their breathing, louder than the shifting gravel under Talcon's boots. The man aiming the rifle toward her swallowed hard, trying to steady his grip. His confidence was crumbling with each step Talcon took. Reddick tried to stand tall, but worry carved deep lines across his face. He had heard stories about Apache warriors who moved like shadows and fought with a level of skill no frontier man dared test. Talcon's presence alone pressed against their nerves. Reddick lifted his hands in a shaky attempt at peace. He muttered to the others to hold steady, but his voice lacked the strength he tried to pretend he had. Talcon didn't rush. He watched the men closely, taking in their stances. The way their hands twitched near their rifles, the tightness in their shoulders. These weren't seasoned fighters. They were scared men caught in their own wrongdoing. He paused a few steps away from them and let his silence speak. Liren saw something shift in his eyes as he looked her way again. Not pity. Something deeper. Something steady like the earth beneath them. Liren felt tears rise again. It's not from fear alone, but from the sudden sense that she wasn't alone anymore. She wanted to call out to him, to ask for help, but her voice refused to leave her throat. Instead, she held his gaze, hoping he could read her plea. The man with the rifle finally snapped, shouting, "Stay back!" His voice cracked so sharp that even he flinched. Talcon didn't react. He simply breathed and watched. The man adjusted his aim again, the barrel shaking as he tried to force courage into his bones. Talcon's expression didn't change. Instead, he let the tension pull tighter, inch by inch. While the mountain seemed to lean in, Reddick stepped between the rifleman and Talcon, cursing under his breath. He knew this could end badly for all of them. He tried speaking to Talcon in a forced calm, explaining they meant no trouble, saying they were only trying to protect themselves. Talcon had heard many excuses in his life. They all sounded the same. Fear turning into cruelty. Lies dressed as necessity. Talcon's jaw tightened at the sight of the rope cutting into Liren's wrists. He knew the mark of suffering, even from a distance. The men argued again, louder now, panicking as the situation slipped from their control. Liren closed her eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by the noise, the cold, the throbbing pain in her arms. She tried not to think about why these men had done this to her, but memories clawed their way back. She remembered the night before. She had been at the trading post near the river, helping an older couple unload supplies. She liked helping them. They always shared warm bread and stories about the early settlers. But just as the sun dipped low, she overheard something she wasn't meant to hear. The same men now standing before her had gathered behind the post, whispering quick and sharp words about a hidden stash of stolen goods, a planned ambush along the trail, and the man they intended to blame it on. She wasn't the type to spy. She had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. When they caught her looking their way, their fear turned into rage. They dragged her out the back door, covered her mouth, and threw her onto a mule. She remembered the rough hands, the threats, the arguments about what to do with her. Reddick had tried to speak up, telling them she could be trusted, that she wouldn't repeat a word. But the leader of the group refused to take a chance. They rode through the dark until they reached the edge of the mountains. They tied her to the pine before dawn, promising they'd decide her fate when the sun came up. And now the sun was up. And so was Ton back on the ridge. Talcon continued to study the men. He didn't move his hands, didn't angle his body to ward attack, but his presence alone was enough to pull them off balance. The man with the rifle whispered to the others that maybe they should leave. Another snapped at him to stand still. Fear twisted every decision they tried to make. Talcon watched them fall apart without lifting a finger. The mountains behind him weren't just scenery. They had shaped him, raised him, trained him. He knew every echo, every shift in the wind. He could hear the trembling in their voices as clearly as he heard the snap of the hawk's wings earlier. He knew which man would panic first, which one would try to run, which one would try to fight out of fear. Liren felt that same wind brush against her cheek. She kept her eyes on Talcon, as if his calm could keep her from falling apart completely. But she didn't know anything about him. Not his tribe. Not his journey. Not why he had followed those men. All she knew was that, when he stepped from the ridge, the world felt a little less dark. Talcon's thoughts drifted back to the moment he found the drag tracks in the dirt. At first, he believed the men were dragging an animal. But then he saw the size of the prints, saw the marks from shoes, saw the scuffle, saw fear imprinted in the sand. He followed fast, driven by instinct and a sense of duty passed down from generations before him. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. Bring justice where the land demands it. The men below had broken something sacred. Talcon could feel it in his bones. Reddick tried once more to speak reason. He insisted they didn't hurt Liren, that they only tied her until they could figure out the next step. Talcon didn't buy a word of it. He took another slow step forward. The men took a step back. The one with the rifle tightened his grip again. Liren held her breath. Talcon's shadow reached nearly to their feet, but still he didn't attack. He was waiting, watching, calculating. He understood that a single wrong move could cause panic, and panic could put Liren's life at risk. These men were cowards, but cowards with weapons could be unpredictable. Liren felt her heart ache as she remembered another reason. She had been at the trading post that night. She had planned to travel east soon. She had dreams bigger than the valley she grew up in. She wanted to walk through towns where no one recognized her. She wanted to learn things beyond the mountains and rivers of her childhood. She wanted to build a life with more than just chores and long winters. But now she feared she would never see those dreams again. Talcon finally spoke again. His voice was low and strong, carrying across the stones without effort. He told them to step back from the tree. Not a demand. A warning carried in a calm tone that made the men realize they were not the ones in control. They hesitated. Their fear grew sharper. Reddick whispered urgently to the others that they weren't going to win this. He said Talcon wasn't like them. He wasn't blinded by fear or foolish bravado. The others ignored him. Their pride was stronger than their sense. Talcon's gaze drifted up the ridge for a moment, scanning the slopes behind him. Liren followed his eyes and saw nothing but mountains and shadows. But Talcon saw something she couldn't see. Movement in the distance. A shift in the light. A sign only someone who knew the land as well as he did could understand. His jaw tightened. The men didn't notice. They were too focused on their own fear. The rifleman raised his weapon again, this time at Talcon. Liren's stomach flipped. Talcon didn't show fear. He didn't even blink. He had been stared down by far worse than trembling hands and desperate threats. But something new crept into the scene. Something heavier. The wind shifted. Khan heard it. Liren sensed it. The men ignored it. A distant rumble carried across the mountains. Not thunder. Not horses. Something else. Talcon turned slightly, his eyes narrowing toward the western ridge. Where the trees swayed in a strange pattern, the men finally noticed his shift in attention and turned to look as well. Then they froze. Liren stared too, her breath catching in her chest. Something large was moving through the trees far up the ridge. Shapes that didn't match the men standing around her. Movement that seemed to steady, to silent, too intentional to be wild animals. Talcon's expression deepened. Liren whispered a shaky breath. Unsure whether fear or hope was rising inside her, the men whispered among themselves again. But this time their panic took a different shape. Talcon stepped slightly in front of Liren, as if preparing for something they couldn't see clearly yet, and the truth hung in the cold morning air, tightening around all of them. As new footsteps echoed from the ridge and shifted the fate of everyone standing on that mountain, the shapes coming down from the ridge grew clearer with every breath. At first, they looked like shadows slipping between the pines. Then Liren saw the shine of metal and the sway of horses. 4 riders moved in a slow line, keeping close to the trees, watching the rocky slope below. The outlaws around her stiffened, and the rifleman lowered his weapon for a moment, confused. Reddick squinted at the ridge, trying to make out faces. Talcon's posture changed. He shifted his weight like a hunter who suddenly realized there were more pieces in the game than he had guessed. His hand did not leave the handle of his blade, but his attention split between the men around. Liren and the riders slipping down from the west. One of the outlaws swore under his breath. "That's Iron Wade," he muttered. "He came after all." The name hit Liren like a stone. She had heard it whispered at the trading post. Wade was the kind of man folks spoke of with lowered voices. A drifter who turned rustling into a trade and fear into a tool. If he was involved, then what she had overheard the night before was larger than a simple stash of stolen goods. It meant a full plan, one that stretched across the valley. She was tangled in the middle of it. Talcon listened to the name too. His eyes narrowed. He had heard stories of a man called Iron Wade who burned a wagon train years earlier and left the blame on nearby tribes. Settlers had come for revenge, and innocent families had paid the price. Talcon still remembered the smoke in the sky, the cries of people who had lost everything. If that man was truly riding down today, then this mountain held more danger than he first thought. The riders drew closer. The man at the front sat tall in the saddle, broad shoulders wrapped in a dark coat, thick iron buckle on his belt catching the sun. His mustache cut like a scar across his face, and his eyes scanned the ledge below with cold calculation. Behind him rode 3 others, their faces hard, hands near their guns. Redek stepped closer to the edge and waved an arm, signaling them in. His voice shook, but he tried to sound in control. "They are with us," he told Talcon, as if that would settle anything. Talcon did not move aside. Instead, he looked from the riders to Liren, then back to the men who had tied her there. Conflicting choices pulled at him. He could strike now and try to free her before more guns arrived. Or he could wait and learn exactly what plot these men were weaving. Because whatever they were doing threatened more than one life. Liren felt her throat tighten. More men meant more danger, but also a strange flicker of possibility. If there were disagreements between them, maybe she could use that to survive. She watched Redek's uneasy eyes and saw a man already regretting his choices. Maybe he could be pushed further. The horses reached the lower shelf of rock and climbed toward them. Hoofbeats thudded against the slope, echoing across the ridge. Iron Wade reined in a few yards from Talcon, his gaze sliding over the Apache warrior with a cool, measured interest. He took in the bow, the blade, the stance. Then he looked at Liren tied to the pine, and a crooked smile tugged at his mouth. "Quite a sight to ride down on," Wade said in a slow drawl. A tied woman, 3 nervous men, and an Apache standing between them. No one answered at first. The tension lay thick as the dust at their boots. Talcon met his gaze without flinching. "Why is she tied?" he asked, his voice even. "And why are you here?" Wade chuckled. "Mountain folk asking questions now," he said. "Interesting day." Redok hurried forward, speaking quickly, trying to explain that Liren had overheard their plans, that she knew about the hidden stolen goods in the ambush, set for the military wagon that would cross the valley trail in 2 days. Wade listened, his eyes never leaving Talcon. When Redok finished, the leader shrugged like it was simple math. "Secrets cost lives," Wade said. "Better she stays quiet." Akichi's stomach turned. She tried to push past her fear and speak. "You want to rob that wagon and blame the Apache for it," she said, her voice rough but clear. "You talked about leaving tracks toward their land, about sending the soldiers after them instead of you." The words burst out before she could stop them. For a second, even the wind seemed to still. Talcon's eyes hardened. What she described sounded far too familiar. It was the same pattern of blame that had painted his people as savages to hide the greed of others. If this ambush happened, more blood would spill across the valley. His people would be hunted again for a crime they did not commit. Wade's grin thinned. "You have a sharp tongue," he said to Liren. "Sharper than is safe." Talcon stepped half a pace closer to her, putting himself more firmly between her and Sarah. "Wade." The soft crunch of gravel under his boots sounded like a promise. Wade noticed and lifted his brows. "You planning to take her from us, mountain man?" he asked. "You and I know how this land works. Those who see the wrong thing often do not walk away," Talcon answered without raising his voice. "I know how this land works," he said. "I also know who tries to poison it." One of Wade's riders shifted nervously in his saddle. His name was Colt Renner, a young man whose eyes held more doubt than cruelty. Liren caught the flicker of unease in his face. He looked at her, at the raw rope biting into her skin, at Wade's calm expression. Colt thought of his own sister, far away, in a small river town. And for the first time, this job felt heavier than the pay. Redek saw that doubt and latched onto it. "We do not have to hurt her," he said, more to Wade than to anyone else. "We can scare her. Send her away. Make her promise to keep quiet." Wade gave him a flat look. "A promise against the hangman's rope," Wade said. "You trust that?" Redek swallowed. He did not trust it, not fully. But the sight of Talcon standing there, steady as stone, had stirred something old in him. Memories of a time before he started running with men like Wade. Days when right and wrong still meant something. Talcon studied all of them, reading the doubt in Colt's eyes, the conflict in Redok, the cold certainty in Wade. Every man carried his own battle inside. Talcon's own battle rose too, as he remembered the village burned after another of Wade's tricks. Children looking to him for protection, elders asking why the white soldiers came. He had no answer then. Maybe this mountain gave him a chance to change something. Liren's arms ached so badly she could barely feel her hands. But her mind stayed sharp. She knew if Wade decided her fate alone, it would be sealed. Her only thin threads of hope were the tension between the men and the presence of this Apache warrior who had stepped down the mountain for her. She decided to push that tension further. "If they hang the crime on your people," she said. "Toward Talcon, the soldiers will ride into your valleys. They will not care who is guilty. They will only want revenge." Wade turned his stare on her sharply. "You talk too much for someone tied to a tree." Talcon did not break eye contact with Wade. "She speaks truth," he said. The soldiers will hunt my families, the children, the elders. You will watch from a safe distance while others die for your greed. Wade's fingers played lightly across the grip of his pistol. You think I care who the soldiers blame? He asked. Out here the only law that holds is survival. Colt shifted again, uncomfortable. Redek looked from Wade to Talcon and then to Liren, his mind racing. He tried to imagine standing next to Wade when soldiers rode through Apache land, burning lodges, firing at anyone who moved, and he could not stomach the picture. Maybe we change the plan, Redek said quietly. We can take the wagon without framing anyone. Wade gave him a look that could carve stone. You getting soft? He asked. We counted on the soldiers chasing ghosts in the hills. That is what gives us time to move the loot and disappear. You want to throw that away because of one woman and one mountain warrior? Silence followed. It was not a friendly silence. Talcon felt the weight of choice sharpen. He had walked into this hoping to rescue a stranger and maybe send a few cowards running. Instead, he had found a web of lies that could ignite a war. His duty to Liren pulled one way. His duty to his people pulled another. If he acted too fast, Wade's men could shoot her or escape to finish the ambush. If he waited too long, the wagon would roll and the valley would bleed. Liren sensed his conflict, though she did not know its full shape. If you let them do this, she whispered, voice hoarse but firm, more innocent people will be tied to trees. More villages will burn. I do not want to die on this mountain, but I will not stay quiet if living means watching others suffer. Her words surprised even herself. Talcon looked at her with a flicker of respect. Wade only frowned. Another subplot wove quietly at the edge of the scene. Down in the valley, unaware of the tension on the mountain, a small frontier town named Alder Bend moved through its morning. The preacher there, a firm man called Hart Ansel, had received word that the military wagon would pass near their settlement. He hoped a calm season was ahead. He had seen too many graves dug on the hill behind the church. He had no idea his town sat in the shadow of Wade's scheme, or that a woman he once saw at Sunday service now fought for her life above the tree line. Back on the ridge, Colt Renner finally found his voice. Wade, he said, more hesitant than defiant, maybe he is right. Maybe this is too far. We can rob folks, sure, but setting off a fight between soldiers and Apache camps will bring trouble from every side. Wade's eyes went cold. You in or out, Colt? He asked. The young rider's throat tightened. He glanced quickly at Liren, then at Talcon. Choosing meant more than picking a side in a fight. It meant deciding what kind of man he wanted to be from that day forward. Talcon noticed. Redek noticed too. Liren's breath came uneven now, from fear and from the deep ache in her arms. The rope cut deeper every time she shifted her weight. She wondered if her hands would even work if they cut her free. She wondered if she would live long enough to find out. The sun climbed higher, washing the ridge in harsher light. Every stone, every shadow, every nervous breath stood out. Birds circled high above, waiting. Iron Wade pushed his coat back, revealing the worn grip of his pistol. Here is how it stands, he said. The wagon rolls in 2 days. This woman knows. This Apache now knows. Either they stay on this mountain forever, or we make sure they cannot tell anyone what they heard. Talcon's eyes sharpened. Colt's fingers twitched near his own weapon. Redek's heart pounded so loudly he could feel it in his throat. Liren felt the mountain around her hold its breath. No one moved yet. Every choice still hung in the air, heavier than the storm clouds building far to the north. As the future of the valley waited on what would happen next on that narrow strip of stone, the ridge felt too narrow for the weight of what hung over it. Even the pines stood still, as if waiting for the moment everything would break loose. Liren could barely breathe. Her wrists throbbed from the constant pull of the ropes, and her legs trembled under her skirt. She kept her eyes fixed on Talcon, because he was the only steady thing in a place ruled by fear and guns. But even he stood tense now, watching every face and every twitch of a hand. Iron Wade tapped a gloved finger against the iron buckle on his belt as he studied Talcon. The faint clink echoed in the cold mountain air, almost like a timer ticking down. Talcon shifted slightly, putting more of himself between Liren and the rifles pointed in her direction. His stance wasn't loud or threatening. It was simply ready. Like the land had shaped him for moments exactly like this. Redek's voice finally cracked through the silence. "Wade," he said, "we do not have to go this route." Wade didn't look at him. "We do," he answered, "unless you care to leave the woman here and let the mountain handle it." "That is the simplest end." Liren flinched. Talcon's jaw tightened. Colt Renner shifted on his saddle, his grip on the reins tightening until his knuckles went pale. He kept glancing between Wade and Liren, and each time his eyes lingered on her, guilt carved deeper into his expression. He knew the truth. If they left her tied here, the wolves or the cold or the wild would claim her long before the sun set. Talcon watched Colt carefully. He saw the battle in him. The young man wasn't hardened like Wade. Something still lived in him that could choose a different path. Talcon didn't say a word to him. Colt felt the weight of that silent understanding. Wade finally turned to Redek, looking annoyed. "You owe me," he said. "Everything you are standing on comes from my planning, and now you are acting like you have a conscience." Redek looked down, ashamed. The truth was he did have one. It had been buried for years under fear, greed, and bad choices. But seeing Liren tied to a tree with a warrior willing to risk his life for her had dug it back up. "I did not sign on to start a war," he said softly. Wade stared him down. "War is what happens when people get in my way." Talcon took in that threat like a spark hitting dry grass. He could already see where Wade's path led. More lies, more blame aimed at his people. More soldiers raining down on families who had done nothing. A deep rumble of thunder rolled far off to the north. The mountains caught the sound and carried it along the rocks. A storm was forming. The sky darkened slightly, clouds gathering like a curtain preparing to sweep across the ridge. Liren shivered. The rope cut deeper as she shifted to lean away from the cold wind. One of the pines creaked above her. A branch snapped under the pressure of the rising storm, falling near her feet. The sound made the men jump. Talcon's voice came low and steady. "Cut her free," he said, directing his words not at Wade but toward the men who still had doubt in their hearts. No one moved. Colt swallowed hard. Redek stared at the dirt. Another outlaw looked at Wade, waiting for orders. Wade rested his hand on the grip of his pistol. "If I cut her loose," he said, "she talks. And if she talks, we hang. There is nothing else to discuss." Talcon's tone sharpened as he answered him. "If you leave her tied, you face me, and I do not walk away." The wind rose. Dust lifted off the rocks and spun around their boots. Colt's horse stamped anxiously, feeling the tension of both storm and men. Wade chuckled without humor. "You think you can take all of us?" Talcon didn't blink. "I am not leaving her." Wade exhaled slowly like a man preparing for violence. "You are outnumbered, mountain warrior." Talcon's eyes flicked to the trees behind Wade, then to the lower ridge. Liren noticed it too. Something moved again in the distance. Another shape slipping through the pines. Not a rider, not a horse. A silhouette crouched low, silent, watching. Someone was tracking them. Wade didn't notice, but Talcon did. He recognized the figure's stance. It was not a threat. It was a friend. A scout from a nearby Apache band. Someone must have seen Talcon's trail and followed. Wondering why he had moved so far from his usual grounds, Talcon didn't signal or call out. He didn't reveal the scout to Wade, but he knew now, deep in his chest, that help moved through the forest behind them. Silent, patient, waiting for his signal, the storm clouds tightened in the sky, darkening the ridge. A bird screeched and flew off as lightning flickered behind a distant peak. Liren gasped softly as the wind pressed harder against her. She wasn't sure what she feared more now. Wade's gun, or the rising storm that could swallow the mountain. Wade motioned to his men. "Get ready," he said. "If he makes a move, you shoot." Talcon breathed deeply, grounding himself. He had faced worse odds before. Fighting wasn't the hard part. Protecting someone who couldn't move was. One wrong shot could hit Liren. He needed every man aiming at him, not at her. He stepped forward slightly. All rifles snapped in his direction. Liren's heart slammed against her ribs. She felt the bark digging into her back, felt the wind pulling her hair across her face. She tried to speak his name, to tell him not to move, but her voice failed. Wade smirked. "Good," he said. "Stand right there." Talcon kept his focus. Not on Wade, not on the rifles, but on Redak and Colt. He needed their hesitation. He needed their humanity to surface at the right moment. He spoke softly, but his voice carried. "You know this is wrong," he told them. "You know she does not deserve this. You know Wade is using you." Redak's eyes twitched. Colt looked away, jaw clenched tight. "If you follow him now," Talcon went on, "you carry his blame on your life. You carry it to your grave." Wade scoffed. "Enough of this," he snapped. "Shoot him if he takes another step." The Colt froze. His finger trembled near the trigger. Talcon didn't fear death, but he refused to let Wade take another innocent life. Liren's voice finally cracked through the air, shaky but clear. "Please," she whispered. "Listen to him." Redak squeezed his eyes shut, like her voice had pierced something inside him. He looked at Wade, then at Liren, then at Talcon. His breathing grew faster. Lightning split across a far cliff, illuminating the ridge for a brief second. Thunder crashed so loud it shook the stones beneath their feet. A gust of wind nearly knocked Liren sideways, slamming her against the trunk as the rope tightened painfully. Her cry broke through the tension. Talcon, his eyes flashed. Colt Renner's grip slipped out of pure instinct as he jumped at the sound, and his rifle barrel dipped for a moment. That crack in their readiness was small, but small was all Talcon needed. Before Wade could shout, Talcon moved. Not fast enough to be reckless, but fast enough to shift the balance. He stepped toward Liren, drawing Wade's focus fully onto him. Wade raised his pistol. Redak grabbed his arm. "Wait," Redak cried out. Pulling Wade back with surprising force, Wade cursed and tried to shake him. Off Colt shouted for everyone to hold. The storm roared louder. Talcon planted himself directly in front of Liren now, his presence shielding her from every gun, every wrong man, every wrong choice. Wade finally ripped free of Redak and leveled his pistol at Talcon again. "Move," Wade demanded. "Move or die." Talcon didn't budge. The wind howled around them, making the pine branches snap above. Liren trembled behind him, staring at his back like it was the only thing in the world strong enough to hold her fear, far behind Wade, hidden in the trees. The Apache scout lifted his bow, the first arrow of the coming. Clash waited on that string. The storm swallowed the sky. The rifles stayed raised. The mountain held its breath, and tall, Gon stood unshaken, ready for the moment everything would break. Thunder rolled so loudly across the ridge that it drowned out even Wade's voice. The storm had reached its full strength, pushing wind across the mountain with a wild force that shook branches loose and scattered dust into everyone's eyes. Talcon stayed planted in front of Liren, steady as a rooted stone, while she struggled to keep her balance behind him. Every heartbeat echoed like a drum in her ears. For one long moment, everything balanced on the edge of action. Then a second sound split through the air, quieter than thunder, but sharper. An arrow cut down from the trees with silent precision and buried itself in the rock near Wade's boot. Wade jerked back, startled, looking around wildly. The shot had not been meant to kill. It was a warning one Talcon had trusted would come. Colt Renner gasped, pulling his horse aside. Redak stumbled backward, realizing this was no longer a fight they could control. Another arrow flew, this one hitting the barrel of Wade's pistol and knocking it clean from his hand. The weapon skidded across the rocks. Talcon moved the moment Wade lost his aim. He lunged forward, knocking Wade back with the weight of his shoulder and sending him tumbling across the ground. The other outlaws panicked. One dropped his rifle entirely. Colt froze, unsure whether to run or help. Redak made his choice first. He stepped between Talcon and the other gunman, grabbing the man's rifle and shoving it away. "Enough!" Redak shouted. "I am not killing anyone for this." His voice broke, but his hands stayed firm. The gunman shoved him back and reached for a knife hanging at his belt. But Colt finally acted. He urged his horse between them and shouted, "Drop it!"
I ride the man.
Hesitated, but seeing Colt's weapon aimed straight at him, he let the knife fall to the ground. Another arrow whistled down from the trees, landing in the dirt an inch from the gunman's boot. He stepped back, trembling. Talcon had Wade pinned beneath him now. Wade struggled, cursing and thrashing as the storm poured rain across them. Liren watched through stinging eyes as Talcon finally forced Wade's arms behind his back and tore a length of rope from the saddle of Colt's horse. "You want me alive," Wade spat. "Hang men like me. They do not cage me." Talcon tightened the rope with a calm expression. "You do not decide that." With Wade bound and the rifles scattered across the ridge, the fight drained out of the remaining outlaws. Colt threw his rifle to the ground and dismounted, breathing hard. He walked toward Liren with cautious steps, hands raised to show he meant no harm. "I am cutting you loose," he said softly. Liren nodded, tears mixing with rain. Colt sliced the rope from her wrists. As the bindings fell away, her arms dropped weakly to her sides. The sudden blood flow made her gasp, but Talcon was already there, catching her before she fell. She leaned against him, feeling warmth through the cold storm. "You are safe now," Talcon said, voice low and grounded. She managed a shaky smile. "Because of you." Talcon shook his head slightly. "Because the land brought truth to light?" Radak stepped closer, his face full of shame. "Miss," he said, "I cannot undo what I did, but I give you my word. I will go back to Alder Bend and tell the sheriff everything. The whole plan. The stolen goods. The ambush. All of it. I am done following Wade, and I am ready to face whatever comes." Liren studied him. The fear that once controlled him had melted away, replaced by something that looked like regret. She nodded. "Then make sure no one else is tied to a tree because of his schemes." Reddick lowered his head. "I will." Colt stepped beside him, his voice steady. "I will ride with him. We will make sure Wade faces justice the right way. The soldiers will hear the truth from us." Talcon looked at both men with silent judgment. He saw their sincerity. Their fear had broken into something better. "You speak truth now," he said. "Then go. Make the wrong right." The storm raged on, soaking everyone as the wind howled across the ridge. But something softer had settled between them now, like the land itself approved of what had shifted. Talcon helped Liren steady herself on her feet. Her hands were red and raw, but she could move them again. She breathed deeply, letting the storm air clear her fear. Behind them, the Apache scout stepped out from the trees. A tall figure with calm eyes, Talcon greeted him with a nod. The scout answered with a quiet word in his native tongue and looked toward Liren. Not with distrust, but curiosity. "She is friend," Talcon said. The scout bowed his head slightly. Liren felt honored by the simple gesture. Colt and Reddick gathered Wade and secured him on a horse. Wade cursed the whole time, but no one listened. The other outlaw, shaken by the arrows and the shifting power, begged to follow them too, promising he would turn himself in. Colt allowed it, telling him he could answer for his choices at the sheriff's office, one by one. They rode off the ridge, heading toward Alder Bend under the pounding rain and dark sky. Their figures grew smaller as they disappeared around the bend, leaving only Talcon, Liren, and the scout behind. With the danger gone, the ridge felt wider. The storm's roar softened into steady rainfall, washing the dust and fear from the stones. Talcon looked at Liren, studying her face with quiet concern. "Your wounds," he said. "We should tend them." Liren stepped closer to him, feeling the warmth of his presence, even as the storm chilled her to the core. "I can walk," she said softly, "as long as you stay with me." Talcon's expression softened. "I will." He guided her down the safer path of the ridge while the scout walked ahead, checking for loose rocks and offering signals when the descent grew steep. Liren stumbled once, but Talcon caught her shoulders gently. His touch grounded her more than the mountain ever had. By the time they reached the lower valley, the storm had thinned into a soft drizzle. The scent of wet earth and pine filled the air, calming Liren's racing heartbeat. A small Apache camp sat tucked between the trees, smoke rising gently from a sheltered fire. Women and children peeked out from hides as Talcon and the scout approached with Lirin. A wise elder stepped out, her hair silver and her eyes deep with understanding. She looked at Lirin with no fear, only curiosity and kindness. Talcon spoke quietly in their language, explaining what had happened. The elder nodded and gestured for Lirin to sit near the fire, warmth wrapped around her like a blanket. A young girl handed her a cloth dipped in herbal water for her wrists. Lirin whispered a thank you and pressed the soft fabric to her skin. Relief spread slowly through her arms. Talcon sat across from her, watching her carefully. She looked at him through the glow of the firelight. The flames danced in his eyes. "Why did you come down that mountain for me?" she asked softly. Talcon paused, choosing his words with care. "Because the land spoke of danger. Because your voice needed answering. Because no one should be left to fear alone." Lirin felt warmth in her chest stronger than the fire. "Then I am grateful. The land chose you." The elder smiled quietly at their exchange. As the night deepened, Talcon stayed by her side, telling her stories of the Valley of the Seasons, of the wild horses that ran through the eastern plains. Lirin told him of Alder Bend, of the kind couple at the trading post, of the dreams she once believed impossible. By the time morning came, the storm had passed, leaving the valley bright and washed clean. Birds called from the trees. The world felt new. Lirin stood carefully, flexing her hands. The pain had eased, replaced with a strength she didn't know she could still find. Talcon walked with her toward the edge of the camp, where the sunlight touched the mountains with gold. "What will you do now?" she asked him. Talcon looked across the valley, then back at her. "Protect the land. Keep peace where I can. Walk the path the spirits show." She smiled softly. "And if I choose to walk near your path for a while," he met her gaze with a warmth she hadn't expected, "then I will not ask you to turn away." They stood together under the morning light, the mountain behind them, the valley opening ahead, knowing that although danger had brought them together, something far greater would guide what came next. And as Lirin took her first steps away from the tree that once held her captive, she walked not as a woman saved, but as a woman rising into a new chapter with courage, hope, and the quiet strength of the Apache warrior who came down from the mountains for her.